Welcome everyone. We're just going to wait a few seconds here for more people to jump on, and we'll get started here shortly. But welcome. All right, I think we're going to get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the WOPN, the World of Pinot Noir Wine Month, the month of Pinot Noir. And here we are at the long-awaited Santa Lucia Highlands deep dive seminar. We have a lot of attendees today, and we're just really excited to get started. Obviously, you have some wines in front of you, and Evan will talk to that. But I just want to pass it off to Evan here with a quick little introduction, a man who definitely needs no introduction, but I'm honored to introduce him. He's our moderator today, author and master sommelier, Evan Goldstein. Evan remains one of the youngest people to ever become master som. Since then, he has dedicated his life to teaching wine and the art of food pairing via his long list of books and as an educator for leagues of service workers and beverage professionals. He is currently president and CEO of Full Circle Wine Solutions and can be seen on television and even occasionally on Martha Stewart Radio on Sirius Radio. So that's pretty cool. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, Evan Goldstein.
Thank you, Mike. I appreciate that very kind opening. And we've got a lot to cover today. First of all, greetings to all of you out there in Zoom land. I know we would all much rather be together down in Santa Barbara. It's a lot prettier, it's a lot more fun, it's a lot more informal and all that. But in the current environment we have, this is a great way to be able to hear from everybody, taste some delicious wines, which we'll talk about in a second, and be able to enjoy and learn about the Highlands, one of my favorite spots on this earth. So what I'm going to do first is, obviously we've got a number of people here. This is not a solo show, and the best of these seminars are indeed team efforts, particularly when you're hearing from the people who to make it happen. So what I'd like to do is just sort of introduce my my panel. What I'm going to have them do is just sort of give you a sense of who they are, and ask each person when they do speak for a moment or so to just sort of tell us what got them to the Highlands, what brought them there. Are you of there? Did you come there? What was the allure of the Highlands that made it such a special trek and important magic place for you? So first off, David, please.
Hi, hey everyone, thank you for coming. My name is David Coventry. I'm the winemaker for Talbott Vineyards. I'm one of those rare Monterey County natives. I was born and raised here. I early on in life realized just the utter beauty of the place. I've been lucky enough to travel the entire world over. I used to manage a rock band. That was a lot of fun. And there's nothing quite like coming home. As I'm fond of saying, grapevines like to grow where people like to live, and there are a few places more beautiful than where I'm currently sitting on the Sleepy Hollow Vineyard in the Santa Lucia Highlands. It's truly a place that is graced for making wonderful wine.
Wonderful, David. Thank you. I always love when you ask people for intros. You get like one little factoid about something that you didn't know about everybody, and I didn't know about your rock and roll roots. We have something to talk about a little bit later. Ed, why don't you join us next? Tell us a little bit about you and what drew you to the Highlands.
Thanks, Evan, and thanks everyone for coming. I actually worked 4 years across Monterey County at Chalone Vineyard before I ever set foot in the Santa Lucia Highlands. And I finally got to the Highlands in 1999 when I took the job as winemaker at Testarossa, and we were buying fruit from there. And if any of you have never been to the Santa Lucia Highlands, I highly recommend it. Gorgeous place, most beautiful views of incredible farmland and great Pinot too.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you, Ed. Adam, you're up next, my friend.
So what got me to the Santa Lucia Highlands? Oh, I'm Adam Lee, Clarice Wine Company. And what got me to the Santa Lucia Highlands was a message from Gary Pizzoni on my answering machine. And then hours and hours spent in the cellar, drinking an amazing wines and perhaps imbibing in some other products that Gary grows. And next thing you knew, I'd agreed to buy grapes from Gary before I'd even seen the vineyard. So that was the beginning.
Wonderful. I hope it was all that you were buying from Gary at the time was grapes, but we'll delve into that a little bit later. Steve, you're up next.
Oh, thank you, Evan. Actually, I'm a transplant and came there in '83 as assistant winemaker at Hahn, and gravitated out into the vineyard when I found I wasn't that crazy about working with 240 volt electricity in rubber boots and wet floors in a cold cellar of 55 degrees without any sunlight. So I ended up in the vineyard.
I love it. I love it. Great. Mr. Revelette, you're next.
Hey guys, Matt Revelette, winemaker at Siduri. I found my way to the Santa Lucia Highlands, basically chasing after some flavors that we found when I was working at a different winery about 10 years ago, where we just received fruit from Gary's and Rosella's. And I said, wow, these flavors are absolutely incredible. After a few more years making wine on the Sonoma coast, I ran into Adam Lee, and we've been getting along famously, and he brought me on to kind of take the reins at Siduri, and I'm absolutely thrilled to be back in the Santa Lucia Highlands.
That's great. Fabulous. And Megan, that leaves you to sort of bring us home here.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Megan. I'm winemaker for WALT Wines, and we're a fairly young brand. We launched in 2010, and the focus is finding unique vineyard sites all along 1,000 miles of Pacific coastline. And Santa Lucia Highlands was the one appellation that we were missing in 2010. So in 2012, we were introduced to the Francione family. They actually came up here 3 hours north to visit us at the winery in Sonoma, and they wanted to find out what we were all about. We passed the test, and they offered us some Sierra Mar fruit in 2012. So we were thrilled to start working in one of the very best appellations for Pinot in California.
Great. Thank you. Thank you all. And we look forward to hearing more from you afterwards. I hope everybody can hear just the oozing passion that everybody has for a very special place that makes some extraordinarily remarkable grapes and ergo some wines. Now, before we jump into things here, just a couple of thoughts. First of all, if you do have the wines, and I know not everybody does, and this seminar is built on two parallel tracks. One, if you did purchase the full 6-pack of wines, the tasting order for them can actually be found in the chat. Gwen was kind enough to post those there for us, and we'll get along to those later and talk about them individually. But if you didn't buy all 6, or maybe you bought 1, or maybe you bought 2, or maybe you bought none, but you do have another Santa Lucia Highlands wine available to you, please go ahead and grab it, get it set up. And most importantly, one of the things that drives me crazy about so many seminars is that they don't give you the opportunity to try the wine or invite you to try the wine until you're there. But what we should do is twofold. Number one, I'm going to ask Gwen to introduce herself in a minute, because yes, she should. But number two, if you do have any wines, 2 wines, 6 wines, whatever, jump in whenever. I can promise you the seminar will be more interesting, and myself and my colleagues will be more interesting if you find yourself drinking a little bit of wine along the way. But also, I think that the texture, the flavors we talk about, and all of that will be brought to life much more vividly when accompanied by something with the glass. We will talk about the wines individually afterwards, but nevertheless, please do not wait for our cue. And on that note, my cue, Gwen, could you please introduce yourself? You're such an integral part of this cohort here.
Hi, everybody. My name is Gwen McGill. I have the privilege of being the executive director of the Santa Lucia Highlands Wine Artisans. We are the group of growers and winery members that want to tell you everything about the Santa Lucia Highlands and basically share how wonderful this region is. So we're thrilled to be here. Thank you all for joining. And Evan, take it away.
Great. Thanks so much, Gwen. So I'm going to leave the winemaking stuff to talk to everybody else about. They know much more about this than I do, but I wanted to just give a little bit of framework and maybe some things to think about before we jump in. And that's actually, Gwen, if you can just go back for a second, just I'd like to have the big backdrop there. I was thinking about what is important to me, what sort of characterizes Santa Lucia Highlands in my mind's eye, and asked a few of my sommelier friends, asked some Pinot Noir advocates and enthusiasts out there about what they talked about. And they came out with lots of different stuff, but what was interesting to me, and where I kind of literally distilled things down, is there's this wonderful sort of amongst those people that love Pinot Noir and Pinot Noir Cognacente, if you will, there is this sort of quiet confidence that sort of exudes, and that came up time and again. And what do I mean by that? There's sort of 2 elements to that. First of all is this sort of element of what I call the jewel, which is to say those people who love Pinot Noir clearly know the Santa Lucia Highlands. And many of them, actually 2 of them, replied to me that it was their favorite wine region in California. And one of the reasons that it was their favorite was not everybody knows about it. And it was their little secret. It was their little jewel. It was something that they could turn other people onto and that they would love. So there is that sort of wonderful preciousness about it that's really, really cool. The second thing that came up again was sort of the humility that is the high. What do I mean by that? But the humility is the fact that if you make the trek to the Highlands, and it is a trek, as we'll talk about when we see that map momentarily, you're not going to find bazillions of wineries. You're not going to find these fancy tasting rooms. You're not going to find big posh hotels. And you're not going to find, the Disneyfication of an area, which is something that I'm not a huge fan of. But what you are going to find there are incredibly unpretentious producers, incredibly amazing grape growers, really good wines, and as Steve alluded to and David alluded to earlier, just some stunning views, as you can see from the background here. And when I think of it too, what I'd like to leave you with before we jump into the specifics here is, for me personally, when I see Santa Lucia Highlands on the label, it's as much that designation, that appellation on there is about as close to a guarantee of quality as you are ever going to see in Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. It's kind of like when you buy an imported wine and you don't know much about it, but you look at the importer on the back and you see it's an importer who has a great track record and whose wines you love, and you breathe a sigh of relief as you pop the cork. Anytime I see Santa Lucia Highlands on a label, I smile because I know the wine's going to be absolutely fabulous in Pinot Noir, in Chardonnay, and increasingly in Syrah. So this quiet confidence actually exudes consumer confidence. So now let's talk about where we're actually situated, because that's important, and we need to situate ourselves. Many of you probably know the Highlands and have maybe even been there before, but a lot of you probably haven't. And so clearly we are in California. Clearly we are on the coast of California, in the northern part of the so-called Central Coast, and you can see it called out there on the map. If you're in San Francisco, which is where I live, I know I've got to block myself out roughly 3 hours plus to get down there. If I drive as far as Monterey to go visit some friends and all that, I'm still about 50 minutes out. But if I'm a little bit further inland in Salinas, more in the interior valley, right on Highway 101, I'm probably only about 30 minutes away. The area itself was established in 1991 when it was designated as an appellation, and you can see that it's long and narrow. It's 18 miles long. It's about 1 to 3 miles wide, depending on where you are, and it's reasonably large. That's to say, there's a lot of stuff planted there. You've got 22,000 acres in total, but only 5,800 of those acres are planted. Of that, that's literally just 26% of the AVA. And what's intriguing to notice here is you've got this long, thin appellation. You've got a northern part and a southern part, and the parallels, not in terms of taste and stuff, but the parallels to Burgundy are absolutely undeniable. You'll notice that you've got a large percentage of Pinot Noir there. It makes up about literally almost 60% of what's planted. Almost 39% is planted in Chardonnay, and that's 96% of the appellation. We know in Burgundy, the rest is Aligoté. Here in Santa Lucia, it's a little bit of Syrah, some Riesling, a little bit of Pinot Gris and others. But really, it's all about the Pinot. It's all about also the Chardonnay, but Pinot today. What's interesting here as you look about this map, and the last thing I want to leave you with before I turn it over to my colleagues, is that the Santa Lucia Highlands is unique amongst California's celebrated AVAs in that it's a grower's AVA. It's not a producer's AVA. That is to say, only a small amount of the fruit that's grown here is actually used by the growers themselves in wineries in the appellation. But the vineyards, of which you see them across here, are important, and they are celebrated. I think of this, again, pardon my going back to Burgundy, but they're a lot like Crus, Premier Crus and Grand Crus, in the sense that there are people who are literally seeking out this fruit, and multiple producers making wine out of these amazing vineyards, just like you would have if you were in a place like Burgundy. So whether it's Gary's, the aforementioned, or Rosella, Cortale Alta, Sleepy Hollow, Pizzoni, Soberanis, and the list goes on. These are amazing vineyards, and the grapes go out because the people want them. So with that sort of framework, I thought we could talk a little bit more specifically about the Highlands. Again, enjoy the wines as we talk, but I'm going to ask my friends here, because they know better than I, sort of what makes things really special down here. And I'm going to ask Steve to sort of take us through initially what the topography is all about, and how does the topography change as you move from the farther north part of the appellation to the farther south part of the appellation.
Great, thank you, Evan. And thank you everyone for attending today. This is pretty exciting, at least for all of us that are on here today. The terroir, and it's an overused term, but I like to refer to it as everything we can't change. And that goes for the soil and topography. These are alluvial benches that were carved by rainfall over centuries, probably at least thousands of years. They're extremely deep, whether you're on the north, the south. It's very hard to find the bottom of the soil. And the only thing that really changes that much in the soil are the rock. And so some areas have more rock than others. Our particular vineyard in the northern end doesn't have any rock in particular. And they're very well drained. They're fairly low fertility, moderate to low fertility, which of course helps us with fine winemaking. They're granite-based soils. They're quite easy and permeable, so they hold a good amount of rain. We can't dryland farm. We don't get enough precipitation to do that. We generally get between 10 and 12 inches of precipitation a year. But because we don't get any rain during the growing season, we can use supplemental irrigation on hot days only to get where we need to in terms of manipulating the vine to concentrate on its progeny. And the only other thing I would tell you about the difference between the north and the south, you get a little more fog in the north. You're going to get a little more wind, a little higher velocity down to the lower elevations than you're going to get at the top of the vineyards or the top of the highlands. And you're going to get a little more fog down low. Down up high, I know at Hahn, many times we were looking down on the lake of fog. So we were in the sunlight. And that's just an overview of what the topography is like in the highlands.
Excellent, thank you. And that's a great leading. Because I'd like David, if you wouldn't mind talking to us, Dave, about the impact. Obviously, you're close to the Monterey Bay. You're literally on close to the water, and the fog is a huge deal. We'll talk about fog now and wind a little bit later. Can you talk a little bit about the impact of the fog on the greater AVA and the growing season itself and the climate?
Sure. I'm going to take a more philosophical bent here. I'll be your philosopher for your ride today. I'm going to say something somewhat controversial. The first duty of wine is neither to be white nor red, it is to be great. What makes for great wines are great vineyards. And what are the aspects that make a vineyard truly great? Well, I look out at Sleepy Hollow, which was actually called one of California's 10 Grand Cru vineyards. And I think what aspects of it make it so beautiful for growing Chardonnay and Pinot. Grapes like to grow where people like to live, and the better the view, the better the wine. That's true. And because of the Pacific Ocean and its tempering influence, the days here are incredibly moderate. We have warm days. That's a beautiful thing. Grapes like that, but they cool off at night. And that's what's really important. Think of it as grapes like to grow where people like to live. Again, you don't mind being warm during the day, go out, get a little sunshine, get a little suntan, but nobody wants to be hot and sweaty and toss and turn at night. Neither do the grapevines. They're very smart. And so they want to grow where it has a nice Mediterranean climate and places like this. So if you look at the wind, which helps slow down the growing season, the wind picks up every day about 1 o'clock. It's cool day, cool nights, warm days. These vineyards, this appellation reminds the grapes of home. We bring over all these clones from France and we plant them all around California, but they respond best in places that remind them of where they came from. Burgundy is quite cool, quite cold. And this appellation, especially in the northern part where Sleepy Hollow is, this reminds them of home. And so the grapes perform, behave, and do their best work in a climate like this and in vineyards like these. The different clones of Pinot and Chardonnay, for that matter, they taste like they should. They have this expression, this hang time, this fruit intensity that comes from the coolness of the weather and the extremely long growing season. One more little metaphor. If you think about wine as a teeter-totter, that balance point, that fulcrum point, is the intensity of the fruit. That's what makes every truly great wine great, is that intensity of the fruit. That's such a description of the terroir. And you can hang acidity, oak, alcohol, tannin, all these things onto the wine, but only to the extent that the fruit is there to support it. So you come up with pithy little phrases that I like to use, like wines aren't over oak, they're under wined, and things like that. Thank you. My job is to find that impeccable, unimpeachable balance point where the wine makes its best sense. You can build very, very big wines and lush wines and beautiful wines, but you have to build them with that inherent balance. Finding balance in a wine is like finding balance in your life. It is the first step to achieving any kind of greatness and satisfaction.
Great. Thank you, David. You are truly the philosopher. Appreciate that. And I'm sure people are applauding and taking good notes out there. Steve, I want to come back to you and recircle back on this wind thing, because I think that it is such a key element of what makes the appellation, the AVA, unique. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of it more, how it's different from other West Coast areas? You know, maybe we see wind in Carneros, but that's kind of different. But the wind in Santa Lucia is so important to its DNA and its signature. Can you riff on that for us?
Sure, thank you, Evan. Yeah, I grew up in Southern California, and every afternoon we'd get a sea breeze. And when I moved to the Highlands, to Monterey County, people said, oh, you know, it's really windy here in the afternoon. And I thought, yeah, I knew what that was. Well, it's really windy here in the afternoon. You can set your clock by it. And it starts, as David indicated, around noon, 1 o'clock. It generally is with us between March, April to September, October. The rest of the time, it's quite nice. There are some real benefits to the wind besides ripening. It actually keeps our urban interface to a minimum. And if you're a farmer and you're really a farmer, not having to worry about dust and noise and all those great things with neighbors is a real blessing and keeps your management challenges to a minimum. And it also, if you get an inch of rain during the growing season, or during harvest rather, you could get an inch of wind to wipe out that effect and mitigate any rot. And you know, the question is, does it influence fruit set or what we call shatter? Not really. That's mainly influenced by temperature. So if the wind has any effect, it is an indirect effect by temperature and sunlight. So not a great deal of effect on shatter. It's a ground effect wind. If you're a pilot, you'll know what that means. If you take off from the Salinas airport and the wind is blowing 25 knots, which is 20 to 25 knots, normal afternoon, it's coming off of the ocean. If you get up about 1,500 feet of elevation, it's either not blowing at all or it's blowing completely the opposite direction as indicated by your instrument. So it's an unusual wind. Its strongest velocity is in the narrowest parts of the valley, the narrowest and lowest parts of the valley. So there are a couple famous service stations, one in Soledad and one in Greenfield. If you open both doors of your vehicle, you're going to lose the contents if it's not nailed or glued down. So its influence on ripening, which of course is most important and germane to our conversation here today, is that it causes our average high temperature to occur at say 1 o'clock much earlier than say Paso Robles or a warmer growing region where it occurs between 3 and 4 p.m. And that's really important on ripening, because sugar, which we all know makes alcohol, is rate and temperature dependent. So rate and time dependent. So as the temperature goes up, the rate of sugar accumulation increases. So if we can inhibit that, it gives us more time, because all the other things we're really looking for to download into the grape, like aroma, structure, and flavors, are time dependent. That's where you get the term hang time. So the wind allows us more time to gather all the great things we're really looking for in a fine wine.
Great, thank you. And that's why we bring Steve along every time we do this. Nobody could explain that any better than he does. I hope this gives you a nice sort of framing as you're thinking about this out here. Other things that set the appellation apart, though, to me are, we sort of alluded to it earlier, are the people. Is the farming, are the families and all that. Adam, could you talk to us a little bit about the whole context of the people here, and how important that is?
Yeah, and I will start out with kind of a story, which is at the Mexican restaurants in Gonzales, they serve not only chips and salsa for free, but they serve salad for free, because everybody in the area is so involved in growing other things other than grapes. And I know we'll come to that in a minute, but you go into that area, into that restaurant, or one of the restaurants, there are a couple of them there, and you see families that have been farming, maybe not grapes for generations, but they've been farming something on their land, be it romaine, asparagus, for several generations. And now you're seeing children take over from their parents in the area and farming grapes. It's an area where I believe that you can trust the families, you can trust them to do what's right by the land because they've lived on that land. Their grandparents lived on that land, and now their children and their grandchildren are part of that land. It's a really special area where you see farmers, not people who have come in to, boy, wouldn't it be fun to have a vineyard? You see people that are really, really committed to this over a long period of time.
Yeah, I think that's so important, and it speaks to the authenticity of the area. Steve, I'm going to come back to you one more time. Speaking of this sort of generational thing, obviously, when you're passing on something from one part of your family to the next, there is this sort of sustainability piece to it. Can you talk to us a little bit about agricultural sustainability and also, again, this whole diversification of crops?
Yeah, so diversification, I think, is a key word in the Salinas Valley. If you look at the crop report that the Ag Commissioner puts out, there's over 50 different crops grown in the Salinas Valley. I like to say that, you know, we have a marine sanctuary offshore that's incredibly diverse. Well, we really do have an agricultural sanctuary here in the Salinas Valley. 250,000 irrigated acres with 50 crops, a sustainable water supply, a sustainable labor supply that's not migrant, and great land. And something I failed to mention when we were talking about terroir is for every mile you travel from the ocean, 90 miles all the way to Paso Robles, there are no barriers. And you will pick up about a ½ degree on average of temperature. So, you know, in Castroville, you could be freezing and need a sweatshirt, and you get to Paso Robles and you're taking that sweatshirt off. So it's just an incredibly diverse area. And sustainability, you know, I really like what Adam said, and that is that you can trust the landowners to do what's right. You know, that's really what is at the heart of sustainability. And all of us are practicing it. Some of us many of us are certified sustainable under various third-party certifications. And it's just great. You know, I've been here almost 40 years, and I can't think of any other place I'd want to be. And I have to admit, when I was in my 20s and 30s, I thought it was going to be a stepping stone place. But it really grows on you, and it's great to be involved with all these great families. I won't ever be a local. My kids will be. 40 years, I'm still a transplant.
Yeah, you're a newbie.
That's a great way of doing it. Well, let's start talking about the wines there. And I hope everybody is partaking in their glass or glasses that they have. I know amongst my my wine geeky friends, those people who are, you know, trying to become Jedi Knights and all that stuff, they're always looking for, what are the markers? What distinguishes that? How will I know when I have a Santa Lucia wine in my glass that's different than, say, you know, Eola Amity in Oregon, or, you know, the Green Valley in Russian River? And I'd like to ask a couple of you about, what do you think makes the signature of the area, be it flavor, be it texture, be it architecture, or whatever? And let's get a couple of different points on you, of view on this one. Might be clones, I don't know. Matt, what do you think?
Yeah, so the most striking thing to me about the Santa Lucia Highlands is the pop of the fruit. And it's always a crunchy fruit. You can get kind of red fruit, blue fruit, black fruit, kind of the whole bramble thicket, depending on where you are in the Santa Lucia Highlands. Towards the south and at, you know, higher elevations, you'll get darker fruit profiles, but it's always crunchy and there's always really good acid structure. Towards the northern end, a little more red fruited, but always kind of that signature acidity and crunchiness of the fruit. So we've talked about all these climatic variables, and really the Santa Lucia Highlands represents this dream checklist that you would have as a Pinot Noir winemaker. You know, the daytime temperatures are relatively moderate. It's breezy. You'll get long hang time, so there's less respiration in the berries. So the acid holds for some really nice, wonderful long hang times. What coincides with long hang times? Really nice, kind of soft, fine-grained tannins as well. So it's one of those areas where, you know, we don't really need to look at numbers. We're kind of waiting for the acid to tame so that the wines will make it through malolactic fermentation, because the flavors are always bright and the wines are always focused and there's no real hard edges. So it's really a winemaker's dream, specifically for Pinot Noir.
Excellent, excellent. Megan, what's your hit? What would you add to that?
Yeah, so for me, I'm a fan of full-bodied, full-flavored Pinot Noir, and this is one of the best places that I can get that with the Sierra Mar Vineyard, the elevation, the hang time, the wind. I mean, we've pushed picks at Sierra Mar as late as early October, and there's this beautiful ripeness. There's a lush deliciousness to the palate, but it's still very fresh. You retain that acidity with those really cool nighttime temperatures. And for me, that's just really fascinating. And I have a lot of fun working with Sierra Mar Vineyard. So.
Are there any particular attributes, Matt talked about that sort of crunchy acidity. Is there a character of the fruit that you notice that's different, because you have the luxury, as you said, of working with vineyards from different in Pinot in different areas? What sticks out for you about the Highlands?
It's the darker fruit aspect, especially in the southern end. The black cherry, the blackberry, you get some cola. You get a lot of wild sage too, which I don't really get in any other appellation that I work in. And there's wild sage growing, throughout the Sierra Mar Vineyard. So it's just a unique combo that I don't find anywhere else. If you push ripeness in the Anderson Valley, you're going to lose all the acidity and your wine's going to be flabby and just kind of boring. You have to pick at lower bricks. Lower alcohol levels, and I don't find that in this region.
Sounds very paradise-like. Ed, you want to throw some other thoughts onto this too? I know you work with a lot of different grapes as well from different areas. What is it about Santa Lucia Highlands fruit that is distinctive in your mind's eye?
I'll agree with what everything Matt and Megan said. And if I can simplify, I'll break it down to just another famous Pinot appellation I work with, Russian River Valley versus Santa Lucia Highlands. So I'm not sure that this is true, but a lot of people say that the typical Russian River Valley Pinot tastes like cherry cola, and I'm not sure that's true. But if that's true, then Santa Lucia Highlands, if you could simplify it, would be like black cherry cola or root beer or the flavor of rhubarb. It's a much earthier flavor in the Santa Lucians than a ripe fruit flavor.
I would add one other thing, and we're going to jump into the wines here, but I just want to indulge me on my Burgundian parallel. But I think that you can't dismiss the fact that there is a character to the northern end and the character to the southern end. There's a Côte de Nuit and a Côte de Beaune element in terms of, you could literally break it down. Point one. Point two, very much like oftentimes in Burgundy, you'll have, for lack of better words, village wines that could be blended within various things within the area that are there. And I think you could find this here. But I also think that what you bring up, Ed, which is also important, is that, it's hard to sort of say Russian River, although there are certainly a lot of Russian River cuvées that are out there. And oftentimes they are because you're literally blending across, 6 different neighborhoods of the Russian River Valley right now. And so many of the wines, and we'll talk about this as we taste today, are blended across vineyards there as opposed to some of the single vineyard wines. You'll have the regionals and the single vineyard type of things. Thank you for indulging me on that. So that said, what I'd like to do now is actually move into the wines. Mike, do you have any questions that were thrown out that might be specifically fabulous to throw at our panel before we jump in here? And by the way, people, you can hold your questions to the parking lot at the end when we cover it. If there's something that you really feel you need to know now that is really germane to the broader topic at large, we can certainly try and entertain them.
Yeah, just as your official caddy of the questions, I would just again urge folks to put it in the Q&A so we can keep track of it. There's some specific things, but I think we're ready to move on. We can hit these at the end.
Excellent. And a number of my winemaker friends I know are Zoom friendly, and they're answering questions along the way,
yeah.
for which I thank them tremendously. So let's go into the wines and talk about them specifically. As you know, based on the original invitation and the availability here, some of our winemakers here have one wine. Some of them actually recommended 2. There's one that's actually in the 6-pack, but they have another wine that they were also excited about that they wanted to show to you. So when they're talking about the wines, I'm going to urge them and remind them to speak to both of them. And we're just going to take this in an appropriate order. I did pre-taste the wines ahead of time and suggested the order that I have. So those of you who do have all 6 of them, if you're unhappy later on, you can send the hate mail to me. But I do believe it's a really lovely narrative that we created here. So I'm going to give it back to you, Steve, one more time. I think it's appropriate that you start with us. You have vineyards that literally, in some cases, date back to 1972, and a lot of experience here. And your style, I think, is is a unique style within the context of this wine. I think it's a really great leadoff wine for us to talk about. So please talk about that wine, Andrew Estate wine. Does he have mute on? Steve, you have your mute on?
It's Steve.
We lost him.
Sorry about that.
No worries. You're not the first.
As Evan mentioned, we have a block, it's still 24 acres of vines that were planted in 1972. They're own rooted. We have no idea what clone they are. Back then it wasn't important. And we purchased the vineyard in 87, so we couldn't find the paper trail if we tried. But it's still producing quite well. I know we're going to make it past 50 and we'll do something special on that vintage. But it allows us to create a blend, if you would, of Pinot Noir. It's 100% Pinot Noir. And we've got clones to work with. We've got the age of the older block, different Coopers. We've got a section we dryland farm. We move that every year because if we kept a dryland farm in one spot, it would probably be dead given the little bit of rainfall that we get. So we move that around the vineyard and assemble, if you would, a blend of 3 different tiers of Pinot each year. And we are minimalist when it comes to our winemaking. We're trying to do as little as possible. We don't add yeast or malolactobacteria unless we need to. And finally, we like to let the grape speak for itself. So you won't get a lot of processing notes to overwhelm any of the beautiful fruit that grows up in the Highlands.
Can you talk to Steve a little bit about if somebody has who is a huge fan of yours, and I know many of the folks out there are, if they had bought both the Santa Lucia Highlands wine and your estate wine, what are the differences between the two of them by virtue of obviously their fruit sourced differently? But in terms, are there any style differences? What do you find when you you go into those two glasses?
Well, it ends up being stylistically different, but it doesn't really necessarily start that way. So we'll get all the barrels out in the spring and we'll go through our consulting winemaker, Byron Kasugi. And I'm actually doing winemaking by committee these days. I've got Don Von Staveren and I've also got Eric Lahman. We're trying to accelerate the pace of discovery because I'm not getting any younger. And maybe I got a few, 10, 20 more vintages left in me. So when we sort by barrel, the Santa Lucia Highlands is going to be the third cut, so to speak. We'll take maybe 4 or 5 barrels for a reserve wine we do, and then the estate, and then the SLH. And then, lo and behold, 6-7 months later, they sort themselves almost by style. The estate tends to be just a little bit heavier. The SLH maybe brighter and more feminine. And the reserve tends to maybe have a little more oak on it.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Wonderful. Thank you so much. And again, if you have the luxury not only of having all the wines, but also having multiple glasses, it's interesting to try the wines side by side as well. Ed, let's move to you next. I actually have been a fan of yours for many years on a lot of the other projects that you're doing, and first tried this wine when we were fortunate enough to get together a couple of years ago and do a little event with the Highlands up in San Francisco. And I find the wine to be striking, and I know there's a lot of history behind it, but what's interesting is I know that you work with amongst some of the lowest elevation vineyards in the Highlands and some of the highest elevation vineyards in the Highlands as well too, in Peterson and Cortada Alta. Can you talk to us a little bit about that, about your approach and your thinking in terms of, again, because you work across so many different appellations, what is your approach towards the fruit here?
Well, thanks, Evan. I've been a big fan of yours too since you were my sommelier at Square One about almost 30 years ago. So yes, as you were saying, this Santa Lucia Highlands, the 2018, is a blend of Cortada Alta, which is, we believe, the highest vineyard in the appellation, goes up to 1,650 feet. There's a view from the top. And it's 86% Cortada Alta in this wine and 14% Peterson Vineyard, which we think is either the lowest or tied for the lowest vineyard in the appellation. And there it is right behind John Peterson, the owner of both vineyards and the owner of Mansfield-Dunne. And actually, Steve McIntyre planted this vineyard in 2007. Nice job, Steve. We love this fruit. And then Ruben Balderas planted the Cortada Alta way up high in 2014. So it's not only the highest vineyard, but it's probably, I'm guessing, the youngest vineyard that we're tasting today. And like Steve, we take all the barrels out in the spring, and we go through each barrel and decide, is it going to be vineyard designated? Is it going to be appellation, the Santa Lucia Highlands, or are we going to bulk it out? And in 2018, we had so little bulk wine after we did all of our blending because it was such a tremendous vintage. We used almost every barrel.
Mhm. When you're, because I know for a fact when you're up vinifying in San Francisco here, you've got fruit coming incoming from all different areas. How does the fruit, perhaps initially, maybe even during fermentation, does it differ at all in terms of the some of the aromatics that you might get from other Pinot Noir appellations? And is that something that you come in and you know, oh, this is showing classic Cortada Alta or classic Highlands or whatever? Is there anything distinctive that you can share with all of our counterparts?
Yeah, well, as the fruit's coming in, the Santa Lucia Highlands gives us a little break because it comes in last of all the Pinot that we work with. Russian River is 2 to 4 weeks earlier, and we're going crazy making wine from other appellations too. And then just as we're winding down, the Santa Lucia Highlands Pinot will come in. So it gives us a nice break. But it's been very few times in my winemaking career, which is now in its 31st year, that I can smell a fermenter and say, this is going to be an amazing wine. And it happened in 1999, a great year for Pinot. And it happened in 2018. Just, you can tell right away the quality of the vintage. And that happened with both of the vineyards we work with in Santa Lucia in 2018, Cortada and Peterson.
Wow, that's it. That's an extraordinary feat to be able to literally tell. You know, it's like looking at an ultrasound and knowing that your kid's going to be the MVP of the All-Star game in so many years. That's quite a skill set. Absolutely incredible. Adam, I'm going to take it to you. You have obviously extraordinary experience in the Highlands over an extended period of time, and a lot of people look to you as being one of the reasons why they are in the Highlands today. Can you talk about your experiences in the Highlands? Talk a little bit about, again, your relationship with the Garys, and talk to us a little bit about this new project you're doing, Beaumarchais, as well.
Yes, so I started in the Santa Lucia Highlands in 1997 with the Pizzoni Vineyard, 1999 with Gary's. I've been working with many of these vineyards since the very first crop. I adore the area, and when I decided to start Clarice Wine Company after having sold Siduri, I had a choice. I mean, with Siduri, we made wine from Oregon all the way down to Santa Rita Hills, and I chose Santa Lucia Highlands because I truly, truly believe that it is an extraordinary area for growing Pinot Noir. With Clarice, I've decided to approach Pinot a bit differently than I did at Siduri. Over time, I take 2 disparate sections at the Gary's Vineyard, one at the lower part, as you can see there, and one at the upper part. And those sections I pick together. They ripen usually 2 weeks apart, but I sample them together. I pick them together so that there's some overripe, some underripe mixed together. And then I really don't do much of anything. There's no yeast added, no acid added, really virtually nothing added to these particular wines other than sulfur. And I do a lot of whole cluster, which is very unusual for me to do as much as I'm doing. This wine is 80% whole cluster. And so that means leaving the stems on, giving it a bit more tannin, as well as the trademark acidity of the Santa Lucia Highlands. And then I started a new project, as you mentioned, Evan, with Philippe Canby, the leading producer in Châteauneuf-du-Pape in the south of France, who has never made Pinot before, but he was very interested. He dreamed of making Pinot Noir. And we started a project at the Salinas Vineyard, right next door to the Gary's Vineyard, and making Pinot following Philippe's recipe in the same way he makes Grenache in Châteauneuf-du-Pape. And that's fascinating, completely different, a bigger, richer, fuller bodied style.
What was it just your curiosity that led you to want to do it? Was his passion? I mean, that's so unusual.
Well, 2 things. In Châteauneuf-du-Pape, out of all the permitted red grape varieties, the winemakers talk about Grenache as being the Pinot Noir of Châteauneuf-du-Pape. So that is part of it. And then if you look at cellar records through the 70s, over half the Grenache grown in Châteauneuf-du-Pape through the 70s was sold to domains in Burgundy and snuck in poorer years to kind of beef them up a little bit. So it is not an uncommon thing to see, some of these similarities between the 2 grapes. And then when Philippe told me, Philippe I mean, Philippe started out making 3 wines his very first year, and they all got 100s from Parker. And so I'm like, oh my God, here's the guy that's absolutely brilliant. And he could have told me, I think I could make kick-ass Pinot. He could have told me I could do this. I could be successful at it. He said, Adam, I've always dreamed of making Pinot Noir. And when you hear that passion, that dream kind of thing, and you hopefully pair up with me and then with the people in Santa Lucia Highlands who live this daily, hopefully it's a dream that comes true.
Absolutely. Well, I think for many folks out there, I don't know how many people go back in Burgundy as long as you're referencing, but there was this whole classic Ronisé of the Burgundian wines early on when they were light and they would have off years, and you would, quietly in the dark, wines would come up from the Rhone Valley, maybe some as far away as, gosh, North Africa back in the day to make that, and there is there. But that's an interesting correlation between Grenache being the Pinot Noir within the context of Châteauneuf-du-Pape, but it does actually make sense for people who are fans of Grenache as well. And I know people will be very excited if they haven't had the opportunity to try that wine. To try it. I think it actually will maybe perhaps change some people's thinking out there on the way they look at both the Rhone and some Pinot Noirs. So excellent. Dave, I'm going to bring it to you.
Ooh,
Obviously, Sleepy Hollow is a classic, to your point, a Grand Cru vineyard within the Highlands and one of the earliest planted in the Highlands as well too. Can you talk to us a little bit about the vineyard and how the vineyard, for lack of better words, creates the wine with you and for you?
Absolutely. Let me start off with this. This is the world of Pinot Noir, right? So there's a little joke about this, that Cabernet is the king of wines, but Pinot Noir is the wine of kings. I want that to be known here. Somewhere there's probably a world of Cabernet Sauvignon. Those poor bastards, I don't know what they're doing, but we're drinking Pinot Noir, and that's a good drink. I hear someone laughing in the background.
That's my wife who's actually partaking in the tasting, but you got her with that one.
Okay, I felt like I had to say that just to clear that out. I am a custodian of flavor. That is really my job. My vineyard manager works 9 months out of the year to get the absolute best out of Sleepy Hollow that he can possibly get. Every bit of farming, fine tuning, leaf pulling, fertilizer or lack thereof, every bit of attention. This is a team effort. I believe to truly get the best out of the vineyard, we talk about terroir being a flavor of place. Well, a very important part of that equation is in fact the winemaker. Making truly great wines is a partnership between a vineyard and a winemaker. Yeah, the vineyard manager's in there somewhere. I like to tell him, his name's Kevin Ryan, vine whisperer, 5th generation farmer, amazing. But I like to tell him the most important thing in the vineyard is the winemaker's shadow. And he goes, yeah, I'll take your shadow. You can leave though. So that's the fun part about having a good time with your vineyard manager. But it really is a relationship. My job is to identify magic, to go out into the vineyard and say, what is performing exceptionally well this year? The overall vineyard, it's about 550 acres, just right in the heart of the Santa Lucia Highlands hillside. My job is to go out and look for what is exceptional. When you've been doing this for a couple years, and I'm on my 25th vintage, in fact, Ed Kurtzman gave me my first job in the industry, which means he's older than I am, and for that, I will be forever grateful. Thank you, Ed. My job is to go out and identify what is extra special in any given vintage. I need to go be with my vineyard. I need to go work with it. The first wine that you have today, our Sleepy Hollow bottling from Talbott, is a good overview of what the entire vineyard can do. It's made with some beautiful Dijon clones, 113, 114, 115, some typical, for the numbers game people, 667, 777, some more esoteric things, some Martini clone. It's a beautiful overview of what this piece of ground can do. Being that we're in the northernmost part of the appellation, as I'm fond of saying, we're in the coolest part of an already super cool appellation. We really do get the longest hang time. Kind of unofficially, as we joke amongst ourselves, there's a last man standing award. And really, we're usually picking the last Pinot Noir of the year. I think Megan said that she picks Pinot as late as the first week of October or something like that, Megan. I start picking the first week of October, and it goes well into the end of October, even into November. Ed mentioned 2018 as being a great vintage. That is true. And I think I picked my last Pinot Noir grapes maybe November 7th. What we have here, just for an excellent example, the Talbott Sleepy Hollow 2017, a bit of a warmer vintage. We had a heat spike right around Labor Day. Didn't really do anything to this vineyard other than just spur the wines to be a bit more opulent, a bit more broad shoulder, a little richer. And so one of the many things we get to do as winemakers is tell the story of the vintages. One of the most fun things you can do, you get a few bottles of Talbott, you line them up, 16, 17, 18. We just bottled the 19s, and you get to see and taste that story. That's a beautiful thing.
For those people that actually also have or either have the Block 23, can you talk about the single? Is that a single parcel wine? Is that a single lot wine? What was the thinking there?
So as much as the Sleepy Hollow bottling is an overview of the vineyard, this Block 23 West, that romantic name, is really apt description. This is a 4.2 acre block of Pinot Noir. How do I know this? Well, it's 3 different clones, 113, 114, 115, for those of you keeping track, and there's 1.4 acres of each. If you're a winemaker, that's terribly inconvenient numbers. How the heck do I ferment those? So I was sitting around during harvest going, how the heck do I ferment those? And I thought, I got it. I will go back in time and I'll use one of the oldest winemaking techniques. I'll do a co-fermentation. I'll harvest all the grapes together. The 113 is the first to ripen. The 115 is the last. You kind of wait for everybody to get it into a good level of ripeness. And it's like making a stew. Everybody in the pool together. As a winemaker, if I'm just getting 1 + 1 = 2, I'm not doing my job. My job is to search out synergy. And this kind of co-fermentation of having everyone in there together takes away every blending option I have. But if you get it right, you have that synergy that makes for an amazing, amazing wine. So this is truly, this 23 West is like mixing a whole bunch of red and black fruits together as a fruit compote. And this wine tastes like the liqueur that forms at the bottom. It's perfectly bone dry, but the impression of ripeness and sweetness that you get is just extraordinary. That's a lovely glass of wine.
Great. 1 + 1 + 1 equals exponential.
1 + 1 = 4, the story of my life.
Yeah. Excellent. Megan, great. Megan, if you want to talk to us about your Sierra Mar bottle, it sounds like you are truly the Sierra Mar whisperer here, and obviously got a lot of experience here. What can you share with us about this delicious bottling?
Yeah, so the Sierra Mar Vineyard is a really, really special site. And we've talked a lot about the dedication and excellence in farming in the Santa Lucia Highlands. And this is a vineyard that was developed by Gary Francione in 2007. He's a 3rd generation farmer in the area, now passing along his experience, his knowledge to his sons, 4th generation taking over. But this is a really rugged site in the southern end of Santa Lucia Highlands. It's got a range in elevation from 650 feet up to 1,100 feet. And we source from several different blocks throughout this vineyard. So lowest elevation to highest elevation. And this is the only place where I'm working with several different blocks, but it's all the same clone. It's all Pisoni clone at different elevations, different soil depth. The highest block is very influenced by the wind, not so much by the fog. That's called the island block. I think we have a picture of that in the presentation. It looks like something out of a James Bond movie or something. It's just incredible. And the views from that block are absolutely amazing. It gives you a sense of the elevation and just how special this area is. Then there's the ridge block, which sits a little bit lower and is kind of sheltered from the wind by a plateau. And then finally the valley block. And the cluster morphology, the shape in each one of these blocks is very unique. They have very different, unique ripening patterns. And rather than, Adam mentioned that he will harvest at one time and try to capture those differences in ripeness, I will actually, wait and pick these blocks when I feel that they're perfectly ripe, and then ferment them all separately and blend them back later during the blending process. And it's extracting the potential from each block, and they're all so different, and they're just lovely. And in 2018, we started working with concrete fermenters, and I find that that's really works with fruit from the Santa Lucia Highlands. It brings out that freshness, the acidity, and so there's a great expression of fruit here. It's really round, it's lush, it's got floral, it's got that earthy sage note to it, and then this fresh minerality on the palate that you don't find that anywhere else. So it's a very special site. And we're also sourcing fruit from rosellas, where I think that the complexity is coming from the clonal difference there. You know, we've got all the Dijon clones at rosellas, totally different ripening pattern, different flavor profile. And so usually I'm kind of going back and forth between, you know, Sierramar, pick there, and then rosellas, and then back to Sierramar and back to rosellas. And Gary is fantastic. I mean, he puts up with me, he helps coordinate all the trucking, advises me when I can't be there. And so as a winemaker working in this region, not owning a vineyard there, this partnership is really, really special to me. And they go above and beyond everybody in the Santa Lucia Highlands. There's a sense of pride and a sense of place in the SLH that you don't find anywhere else.
Excellent, excellent. How wonderful. I've got a few questions that I'd love to throw out to the panel, but Mike, I want to also take advantage of the fact that we've got 100 and something people there. I'm sure there might be a couple of questions there, and I want to make sure we get to those questions too.
Yeah, Adam has been a machine at answering questions. So we actually have no open questions right now.
Okay,
but
then
I will plug, I'm just going to let people know that in the chat, I'm going to put in the auction lots from these winemakers that they've donated. So you can check that out as you continue.
Right. And I'm going to do the mea culpa big time, as I was just sitting here looking across my things. And Matt, man, oh, I feel so bad. Dude, I owe you. I'll take you out for dinner next time you're up in San Francisco. Now that our restaurants are opening up again, I owe you. You clearly have the opportunity to make several single vineyard wines across the SLH, which I think is quite unique and wonderful. Can you talk to us about that, and obviously the rosellas here too? My apologies.
I would love to. In keeping with the time-honored traditions of Siduri set forth by Adam Lee, we have found that the more vineyard designates you make, the more fun we can all have. That is certainly true. So we source principally from 5 different vineyards in Santa Lucia Highlands. So kind of from south to north, Sierramar Vineyard, which Megan summed up fantastically, Limeravo Vineyard, which kind of shares the driveway that Adam found with Sierramar Vineyard on this beautiful alluvial bench towards the southern end of the Santa Lucia Highlands. Moving north, we've got Sobranis and Gary's, which I would say share a fence line, but there's no fence between them. So it's really one contiguous property with vineyards planted side by side. And moving even further north, a few miles from the northern end of the appellation, we're kind of a stone's throw south of where we started with this tasting with Steve's McIntyre property. What is really cool and striking to me about the Rosella's vineyard is that there is so much detail that goes into the farming. It is not just some agricultural commodity. This is Gary Francione and Rosella's front and backyard. So there is a tremendous amount of detail. And the way that these ranches that we source from are farmed, it's the same crew of 30 to 40 people that have been farming these ranches for a long, long time. So they know the ranches like the back of their hands. So what really strikes me about this vineyard is there's almost kind of this electric acidity to the wine that really, provides, a lot of life behind it. And 18, was an absolutely picture perfect growing season, especially on the heels of 17, which kind of had, ups and downs, as I would summarize it. We kind of kept waiting for something to happen besides another 80-degree day in the Santa Lucia Highlands. So we got this really awesome hang time. So all of those climatic factors are expressed in the wines, and it was really an effortless vintage. It was one to basically get the pick right and then more or less stay out of the way and let the wine reveal itself in fermenter and then in barrel. So really, really happy with the way this wine turned out. And, it's one of the few vineyards where there's a little bit of pressure because Rosella's name is on the bottle. So we want to do right by her and do right by the vineyard as well. So we owe it to them to get it right. And I think that we did in 18.
So let me ask you one follow-up question, Matt, before I take it out to some general questions. Working with so many single vineyards and so many different people, and each vineyard clearly has its own individuality. When you're making a wine that's an appellation wine, what is your thinking in terms of going in about how you architect that, how you put that wine together?
Well, one, it's going to be a hell of a lot of fun because there's so much variation as you go from north to south in the vineyards that we source from. And we source from all of these vineyards with the intention of making vineyard designate wines. And oftentimes it's really fun to put, say, the Pisoni selection or Clone 23 from Sierra Mar that's a little bit darker profile, a little bit more tannic, with something that with really high toned aromatics like the Rosella's 777 or something like that. So it's about kind of striking a balance that represents kind of these disparate vineyards really in one contiguous way that makes sense and has harmony and balance. So it's the most fun you can have making an Appalachian wine is in the Santa Lucia Highlands.
Is that harder to do than making a single vineyard wine, or easier to do?
I think so, because single vineyards, more or less, it's the expression of one very small area, and kind of striking a balance between richness and savory notes in Sierra Mar or Sobranos or Gary's without kind of covering up the effusive fruit from Rosella's, that can be very difficult. And there's a little bit of second guessing before you kind of decide on the final blend and the totality of barrels that are going in. But it's so much fun to do that and kind of see which string you can tug on to kind of untie the knot.
Excellent.
Hey, Evan, you just brought up a really good point. Can I mention something quickly?
Sure, jump on in.
So I don't source from all over the Highlands. I have one vineyard to work with. So the flip side of the coin to, is it harder to make an Appalachian wine, is how do you tease out differences from within one vineyard?
Mm-hmm.
I make four different bottlings off of Sleepy Hollow, and teasing out those differences requires a little bit of attention. We have the clones, we have the rootstocks on a fairly homogeneous piece of ground that's great all the way across. It's a good problem to have, but you start to look backwards and forwards in terms of winemaking techniques. The making great wine is never a matter of convenience, but it's always a matter of necessity. So we try to find the most difficult, time-consuming, and expensive way to do something, and we're there for that. So different size barrels, different coopers, different forests, different toasts, and I think all the winemakers, every touch point you have to affect the wine, you try to build complexity in, be it with working across one vineyard, or as Matt was talking about, making an Appalachian blend.
Great, thank you. All right, Mike, I'm going to turn it over to you in a second. Do we have any burning questions out there in the chat, or anything that we want to address, or are we good, as they say?
I think you're good. There was a question about the winds that I think Ed is answering right now, but given the winds and the AVA, is there a consistent method of canopy management that you guys all adhere to?
Yeah, I pressed answer live, but I should have pressed type answer. I was going to say everybody in the strong wind zone plants their rows north-south usually.
Excellent, thank you. Well, on that note, I know I always try and finish on time on these things. I know everybody from winemaker to those of you out there listening to us are busy people, but I simply want to thank my extraordinary panel for really delivering an evocative conversation that, if you're not completely sold on the fact that the Highlands is one of those most magic spots on earth, and we just talked about Pinot Noir. The Chardonnays are extraordinary. The Syrahs are lovely wines as well too. But I want to thank you for that, and I want to thank Gwen for all of her work behind the scenes. This would not have happened without her. And I want to thank Mike and everybody too for the opportunity to be with us. And importantly, thanks to all of you out there in Zoom land for listening to it. And Mike, I know you want to talk a little bit about the World of Pinot and the auction specifically. So back to you, my friend.
Yeah, thank you so much, Evan. Great panel. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Just one thing I just want to mention, if you like these wines, all of these winemakers have contributed either a series of 6 bottles. There's a selection actually from SLH that has some really unique wines in it that are all available at worldofpinotnoir.com. It's in the chat there. Amazing magnums. There's a couple 3 liters in there as well, and some real interesting library wines. And bidding is going, it's pretty hot right now. So I highly recommend, if you're interested in bidding on these lots or checking them out, to get on it as soon as possible. So.
Great. Gwen, any parting words? Anything you want to say?
No, thank you all for your participation. We really are thrilled with so many wonderful folks that messaged us in advance and shared their excitement about this seminar and this event. So much thanks to the World of Pinot Noir team. We're so excited that we were able to in some way celebrate Pinot Noir this year, albeit a little different. We hope to see you guys next year at the Baccara.
Oh, I hope so.
Yeah.
100%.
All of us. Thank you, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us and spending an hour of us drinking some delicious wines and talking about an extraordinary spot.
Thanks.
Thanks, Evan.
Bye.
Thank you
Wow.
all.
Drink more wine, folks.